Hey guys, welcome to episode 7 of the Charleston Daily Mail Prep Football Podcast. I'm Tom Bragg, joined as always by Daily Mail Preps editor Derek Taylor. We got a packed show again this week. Capital Huntington was huge. Big game Bridgeport thumped Fairmont Senior. George Washington, I thought, maybe made a bit of a statement on the road at Princeton. We're going to update you guys on the Daily Mail poll, and we got a handful of big games to look at that are coming up this week. Plus, we'll also have Derek's weekly update on the Kennedy Award. We're going to start the show off, though, with the game you were at, Derek. Capital at Huntington. Now, I picked Huntington to win this game, but I don't think anybody saw Capital putting the ball on the turf 11 times and still being in this game late like they were.
Yeah, I think that actually speaks to the fact that Capital's defense isn't too bad either. They stayed in it throughout the course of the game. It was only 7-0 Huntington at halftime. You know, Huntington only had 136 yards of total offense in this game, but that speaks to just how good Huntington's D is. I mean, Capital hasn't been held to under 2 touchdowns very often in the John Carpenter era, or really ever, but, you know, Capital got its first TD with less than a minute left in the game. And they were down, 17-3 before that happened. It was a defensive game, really. Capital did put the ball on the ground 11 times, lost 4 of those. A couple times really killing momentum that they had. In a game that close, is that closely matched, little things like that are going to, turn out to be the difference makers. What I really liked again was watching Huntington's defense and the way that they totally disrupted Capital's offense. Tyree Pratt wasn't really able to create on the fly. Billy Seals, Huntington's coach, told me after the game that their design was to make him beat them from the pocket, and because that's really not what he typically does. He makes stuff up on the go and creates on the fly. They reined him in. He had 17 carries for, I think it was -2 yards total, which is a season high, maybe a career high for him for carries, and definitely a season high and maybe a career low for him for yardage. Capital was not ever able to get into the flow of what it likes to do offensively.
Now, having now beaten both Capital and Cabell Midland, I think it's pretty safe to say Huntington has established itself as sort of the team of the South in the state. It seems like each year you sort of get a big team, typically an MSAC team, that is kind of the juggernaut team. I think that was kind of Cabell Midland last year. And then you've got your pick from the Northern Panhandle, the Eastern Panhandle, and say like the North Central part of the state, a Martinsburg or a Morgantown or Wheeling Park, Brook back in the day, teams like that. I think Huntington's pretty safely settled into the front runner to kind of be that really good team from down here right now with wins over, like I said, Capital and Cabell Midland at this point.
Yeah, I think so. And now they get a little bit of a break with their schedule. They've got a week off this week, then they go to Parkersburg. And I don't think that they're going to be really tested again until the season finale, which they've got South Charleston. And that'll be, another track meet kind of team that'll get out on the perimeter and be able to keep up with Huntington, but can they match up, between the tackles? Nobody has so far. I do think Huntington is the best AAA team in the southern half of the state right now. I'd agree with that.
Going back up to the northern part of the state, or I guess the eastern part of the state, as it would be this time, what's the latest on Martinsburg's situation? Last week we talked at length about the Bulldogs and their quarterback eligibility problems. How'd that go down this week with them?
Well, as expected, the 23rd Circuit Court granted the injunction for Malik Watkins to play, and that nobody thought that was going to fail to happen. They have set a date for the hearing for a permanent injunction for October 25th. Now, what is either going to happen from here? What's going to happen from here is either the SSAC is going to back down and Watkins is eventually going to be granted his eligibility, or the SSAC is going to continue to fight it and take it to the Supreme Court, where every time the SSAC does that, the SSAC's original ruling wins. I hope people are listening and understanding. Martinsburg is facing a 3-7 record. Okay, because they're continuing to play Watkins because they believe that they are in the right. People have believed that they are in the right before. People have been told that they are wrong about believing that they are in the right before, and I don't really see that changing this time. That's where we are with it.
Now,
honestly, Tom, let me speak for a minute on
this.
No,
go right ahead. Go right ahead, man.
Every time this comes up, not this. By this, I mean something that a member school doesn't agree with the SSAC on its ruling for. It cries foul and takes it to the court system. And it goes to the Supreme Court eventually because the SSAC stands its ground. And when it gets there, the Supreme Court tells each and every school that brings a complaint to them about the SSAC that, hey, you willfully joined this association. They govern you. If you are not happy with their decision, leave that organization, but don't bother the court system with your problems. And yet, this is so important. It happened the last time. I mean, the last time, if I'm not mistaken, the Supreme Court told South Charleston, I think, Brooke was involved in this situation, the SSAC, and Martinsburg stood something to gain too. But bottom line, the Supreme Court said, don't ever bring this crap to us again. We don't want to hear it. And here we go again. Because it was so important that Malik Watkins play against Morgantown 2 Fridays ago that they were not happy in waiting for the Board of Appeals, the Board of Directors, it's known now at the SSAC, to meet. They couldn't wait for that because they had to have Watkins that night, so they went to a court to get an injunction for him to play that night. Look, do I think that Malik Watkins should be able to play? Judging on the information that I know about the case, yes, I actually do. I think they should grant him his eligibility and let him play. But you know what? The letter of the law needs to be applied. I think maybe the law needs rewritten, but by following it, he's ineligible. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I think that's how it's gonna. I think that's gonna how. I think that is how it's going to shake out again.
Yeah, that's kind of been
7-0 for Pete.
Yeah, that's kind of, I was going to say, that's kind of been our internal conversation about it throughout the whole thing, is that not necessarily whether, we want it to happen a certain way, but we know how these things happen because we've seen them happen now several times. The SSAC gets its way on this. It made the ruling based on its rules that all of these schools, these member institutions, have signed off on, or they've volunteered to be a part of this organization, knowing those are the rules. And whenever they don't want to play by them, like you said, they cry foul and go to the courts, and the courts are tired of hearing it.
Yep. Hey, guess what? It's also a waste of taxpayer dollars, everybody.
I wonder, and I'm not trying to be funny because I know there's a lot of bad jokes about the government shutdown right now, but if the government shut down and this is going into appeals, will there ever be an appeal? I'm serious. I don't know how that works.
Who knows? Maybe this might turn into a federal case. Maybe it's that important.
Oh, jeez. Well,
the world gets to hear me snort. That's awesome.
Oh, man. That's a first.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's as good a segue as any. I'm going to talk a little bit about Point Pleasant. We've mentioned the Big Blacks here and there this year. They went up to Brooke on Friday, and I thought really handled Brooke. Not a great Brooke team, but I don't think a terrible Brooke team either. But just the way that they beat them and the way that they've really just been playing very well since their move up to AAA. There wasn't really that baby steps period you see with teams like, like Winfield when they moved up to AAA, just for example here locally. It took them a while, and they're still not quite there where, they're consistent year in, year out. They're a good team. That's what Point Pleasant is right now in AAA. I don't think they're necessarily in that upper echelon with teams like we talked about earlier with the Martinsburg, Morgantown, Capital this year, Huntington, Cabell, Midland, teams up there. But I think they might be a little closer to those teams than they are some of the teams in, say, the back half of what'll be getting into the playoffs. I think they're a solid bet to maybe be a home team even in the playoffs this year.
Yeah, I think their schedule's conducive to it, and obviously they have the big test this Friday night when Oak Hill and Jalen Jones come to Point Pleasant. Now, that's one of the big games is statewide this week, and this is one of those, just a couple games I saw on Point Pleasant's schedule that if they can get by this, they might run the table. Point has a schedule conducive to them getting a high playoff seed. When they jumped back up to AAA, they didn't join the MSAC or anything like that.
Did they have that option?
No. I remember I had talked to Fred Aldridge about it when the class changes were made and wondering who might be joining or leaving, because at the same time, Lincoln County and Greenbrier East were both looking to hoof it, right?
Yeah.
And he told me that really neither Oak Hill nor Point Pleasant were candidates, and for various reasons. But what they did up at Point Pleasant was generally designed a schedule, and they didn't get it all AAA last year, which was their first year in the class, but this year they got it. They designed a schedule that was completely AAA teams, but I think they might play Ravenswood. I'm not sure about that. Let me double check that. But it's almost exclusive AAA teams, but they're teams that are in enrollment right around the same size as Point Pleasant. That's why you see them playing Oak Hill. That's why you see them playing Lewis County and teams like that. Those are teams at the bottom end, enrollment-wise, of the AAA class. Now, I agree with you. I think the Point is right around that. In competitiveness, I think they're right around that maybe 6 through 10 level, right?
Yeah.
But I think they might end up with a top 4 playoff seed. Yeah, let me looking at the schedule right now. Lincoln County, Ripley, Logan, Winfield, Brook, Oak Hill, Ravenswood, Shady Spring, Oak Glen, that's another AA, and Lewis County. So they've basically bulked up to 8 AAA games. But if you look at those, there's no MSAC teams, and there's no perennial powers. They're easing their way into it, which it's continuing the success, and I think success builds programs. I mean, you continue to build your program when you're having some success. So before biting off more that they can chew, they're working their way into it, and kudos to them for knowing how to go about this. Going up to Brook is no easy feat. Brook is 1-5, but first of all, it's a long trip. Second of all, it's never an easy place for a visiting team to come in, especially from outside the Northern Panhandle.
Yeah, it's not like Point Pleasant gets to go up there and play every couple of years. That was probably their first trip there ever.
Exactly. Brook had also played 4 undefeated teams to open up its season. I think Point Pleasant made it 5. So nobody Brook has played had lost a game this season. So that 1-5 is a little bit misleading.
You talk about Oak Hill being a test for Point Pleasant. I think they're kind of in the same boat as Point Pleasant. Point Pleasant's a good test for them because their wins have come against teams like, you mentioned Lewis County. Oak Hill went up there and played Elkins and Buchanan Upshur, I believe. No, it was Elkins and Musselman?
Yeah.
That's
Elkins,
who it was.
Musselman, Buchanan Upshur. They went up to Musselman in the second week. Nicholas County and Shady Spring they've beaten. So, yet again, Musselman, I think Musselman's going to make a run at a playoff spot as things, continue through the season. I think they might get in with like a 7-3 or even a 6-4. Oak Hill went up there to Inwood and beat them 48-35. Bunker Hill, whatever, Inwood. Oak Hill still has this trip this week to Point. Then they get Lewis County coming down there. Then they get Bluefield, Woodrow, and Greenbrier East all at home to close the regular season. I think Point's schedule might be a little more challenging overall, but Oak Hill is looking at a similar situation where this could be the game that vaults them into a 10-0.
Speaking of undefeated teams, we didn't really maybe necessarily think George Washington would be an undefeated team as we were sitting here talking on episode 7 of our podcast. But here we are. The Patriots go down to Princeton last Friday, and I mentioned it at the top of the show. I don't necessarily think it was a huge statement as far as who the opposition was, but that wasn't a bad team in Princeton, and that's a long trip to get down there, and they really put one on the Tigers. Draven Rife had an absolutely fantastic night, and I think GW's kind of come up and grabbed one of those rings as, hey, don't forget about us. We're still here. They're going to be there with the Capitals and the Cabell Midlands and the Huntingtons, I think, eventually when things shake out.
They could be. There's some concerns I have. Like I said, I do like GW's defense, and there's no way around it. Draven Rife is a great high school running back. He's showing that. I mean, the guy's carried, it's close to 170 times already in 5 games. He's he's rolling up a lot of carries.
Seems to be working, though.
5 yards, 355 yards down there at Princeton, at a place that typically GW has a tough time, knocking the bus off of it after it gets there. It takes them a while to warm up once they get to Princeton when they have to go down there. It's not an easy place for GW to play. The thing is, GW still has Friday night's game against Hurricane. Look, I'm taking GW all the way there. And then they've got to go to Cabell Midland the 18th and 4 games against Parkersburg and Ripley, then the finale against Capital. Now I think we're looking at a minimum of 8-2 for GW with a real chance for something more. The concern I have is maybe further down the line, once we get into the playoffs, because I still don't know what offense is capable of doing other than handing the ball off to Draven Rife 30 times a game. And that's what they've done so far, and that's all they've had to do. But, that when a Midland or somebody makes them go outside, put the ball in John Alexander's hand at quarterback and make him beat you with his arm, I want to see if that can be done. I want to see how GW does then before I really put them with Huntington, Morgantown, Martinsburg. Those are really the 3, in my opinion, right now.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's fair. And, man, that's a good segue, because now we're going to talk about the Daily Mail football poll. And in Class AAA, Martinsburg's number 1, Huntington's number 2, Morgantown's number 3, and right outside that at number 4 is GW.
Yeah.
Going back, though, we'll just go down this like we usually do each week. Martinsburg in at number 1 this week, and Huntington at number 2. I thought this was interesting. They split the vote for the number 1 spot. There's 10 votes each week. Martinsburg got 5. Huntington also got 5. Martinsburg plays Spring Mills this week. Derek, is there a mercy rule in high school football?
Well,
it's going to be bad. It's going to be real bad.
I'll tell you what. Gold star for Spring Mills for schedule in Martinsburg this year. You know what? There's a lot of schools who, in their situation, for those who don't know, Spring Mills is a school that opened up as a deconsolidation of sort from Hedgesville and Martinsburg. It took mostly Hedgesville kids. But, they only have freshmen, sophomores, and juniors there. There's no senior class even in the school this year. They let those kids finish at their original schools. They haven't won a game this year. They're not going to win a game this year. They're just getting pummeled by everybody they play pretty much. But
these are teams that when Martinsburg plays them, Martinsburg pummels them the way they've been pummeling Spring Mills.
Exactly. Yeah, the people Martinsburg beats up on, they're beating on Spring Mills. But there's a lot of those teams that traditionally in the Eastern Panhandle, you look at Hampshire as a perfect example, won't schedule Martinsburg. You know, Spring Mills said right off the bat, yeah. And so good for them. Yeah, that's going to be an ugly game, though. I doubt Martinsburg's starters play very much, if at all.
Man,
maybe they won't have to forfeit this game.
What kind of crazy stuff would it be if Spring Mills pulled that off? I don't know why I was instantly reminded of. Did you ever watch the Friday Night Lights television show with Dylan and East Dillon?
No, I never did watch.
Oh man, that's a great show. You should watch it. I'm sure some of our listeners have watched Friday Night Lights with Dylan and East Dillon. That's I won't spoil it, but if Spring Mills was able to beat Martinsburg, that would be very, very similar to something that happened in the show. Gotcha. But anyway, Huntington at number 2, as we mentioned, also got 5 first-place votes. They're off this week and then at Parkersburg next week. Morgantown, number 3, they host Wheeling Park, and we'll get into that one here in just a little bit. GW, number 4, they host Hurricane. We'll get into that one here in a little bit. You're all going to have deja vu here in just a second. Number 5, Capital, they're 4-1. They host Cabell Midland, and we'll get into that one here in just a little bit. Wheeling Park at number 6, as we mentioned, they play at Morgantown. Cabell Midland at number 7, they play at Capital. So a lot of top 10 matchups between some heavyweights this week in AAA. University is at number 8. They are 5-1. They play Logan this week. Hosting Logan this week. That'll be a long trip for the Wildcats going up to Morgantown. Oak Hill at... I'm sorry, go ahead.
It'll be a longer one coming back.
Yeah, probably so. Probably so. At number 9, Oak Hill at 5-0. We talked about that earlier in the show. They are at Point Pleasant, and Point Pleasant, number 10, 5-0. They're hosting Oak Hill. Also at number 10, South Charleston tied with the Big Blacks. South Charleston 4-2. They are at Ripley this week. That's it for Class AAA. In Class AA, no surprises at the top. Number 1, Wayne gets all 10 votes. They are 5-0. Pioneers hosting Scott this week. Number 2, Bridgeport, 5-1. They host Kaiser this week, and that's one we'll talk about. And Bridgeport may have firmly established themselves at number 2 with that big win over Fairmont Senior this week. Derek, what do you think?
Without question. I didn't really expect it coming. I didn't expect it to be that lopsided. I saw the stats from the game, and they completely shut down Fairmont Senior's running attack. It looked like Norman wasn't really throwing the ball all too well, so it looks like they got to him a little bit, I'd take from that. Mm-hmm. And Anthony Bonamico, the senior running back at Bridgeport, just ran hog wild. Let me call up those stats real quickly. I know he went for 3 TDs. But
yeah, I was following along with that game on Twitter. There was a lot of the guys that and gals, I guess, in the media and in the community online on Twitter that tweet about football games were at that game. A lot of updates coming in, and it really just sounded like from the opening whistle, Bridgeport just came out and punched Fairmont Senior in the mouth and didn't stop punching him in the mouth until the game was over.
Bonamico had 24 carries for 275 yards and 3 TDs. That's not a typical single individual performance from a Bridgeport running back. Usually they have a lot of guys,
Yeah, they'll have 3 guys that run for those same combined numbers.
Yeah, Bonamico just went off Friday night, though.
After Bridgeport, at number 3 in this week's Class AA Daily Mail poll, Bluefield at 4-1. Beavers are at Riverview this week. Number 4, Frankfort, 5-0. Host Fairmont Senior. The Polar Bears are at number 5 this week, coming off that loss to Bridgeport. That should be a pretty good one in AA, 4-5 matchup between Frankfort and Fairmont Senior. At number 6 this week, Kaiser at 4-2. They're at Bridgeport. A lot of good games this week, man. Number 7, Lincoln. They are 5-1. Cougars are at Ritchie County. Also at number 7, tied with Lincoln, Wyoming East. They are 5-1 and host Pikeview. Number 9, Sissonville. They are 4-1 and play Herbert Hoover in what's kind of another one of those kind of sneaky good rivalries. They're the 2 AA schools here in Kanawha County. I know Sissonville's been AA for a while, and Herbert Hoover kind of went back and forth between AAA and AA, so they weren't playing each other a whole lot and everything for a long time, but that's one that's gotten good here in the last, say, 10 years or so. Don't you think, Derek?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's
In just
bit of
about
a
any
trap.
sport too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, everything from softball and baseball to football. It's any time of season you get two double A teams. You have so many triple A's in Kanawha County that those are the only two double A's. They're going to find reasons not to like each other. So, yeah, it's good. It's a good time.
Yeah, and they're typically, in the same section, and if, I can't think of a time they weren't in the same section, but if they're not in the same section, they're always in the same region. So they're going to see
Right.
each other in important games just about every year, like we said, in every sport. And that is, again, number 9, Sissonville, and Herbert Hoover, who they got off the slide this week. That win at Poca. Poca not doing too well this year, though, so they've been good for what ails a couple teams. I think Nitro's only won this year. That was also against Poca. At number 10, rounding out the Class AA poll, Summers County 5-1. Bobcats hosting Independence this week. There are others receiving votes in Class AA. I didn't mention any with AAA because there weren't any others that received votes. But in AA, it goes Nicholas County, Chapmanville, Ritchie County, and Philip Barber, rounding out the others that got votes. In Class A, Madonna, 10 votes, 5-0, number 1. Blue Dons hosting Bishop Donahue this week. That's also a pretty good rivalry game. Bishop Donahue, not quite maybe what we thought they were earlier in the season. One of those teams. Still not a bad game for the number 1 team in the Class A Daily Mail poll. Wahama White Falcons, number 2. They are 5-1 and play Federal Hocking, Ohio. Wheeling Central's at number 3. They are 5-1. They play Shadyside, Ohio. Number 4 is St. Mary's. Undefeated St. Mary's, I should say, 5-0 at Calhoun County this week. Number 5, Greenbrier West, looking like they might need to bounce back a little bit from that loss to Summers County a couple weeks ago. They are 5-1 and hosting Pocahontas County this week. Number 6, Clay Battelle. The Seabees are 4-0, and they actually play Valley Wetzel today in a game that got postponed from the other night. Derek, have you heard anything about that? What went on with that?
Oh, that was because of the funeral.
Okay, that's right. There was a track athlete, correct, at Clay Battelle, and I believe Kristen Karalik, who was on the show a couple weeks ago, wrote a very nice article about it. I had forgotten completely about that, but yes, that was because of that.
And her funeral was Friday afternoon, I believe.
Okay, so that explains that. Like I said, Clay Battelle, number 6, 4-0, and they host Valley Wetzel today. That's weird. You don't see a lot of varsity games on Mondays. That's usually JV night. But going on, number 7, Moorfield, 5-1 at Fayetteville. Number 8, Williamstown. They are 4-1. They are at Oak Glen. Number 9, Valley Fayette. Greyhounds are 5-0, coming off a win against Meadow Bridge in what Mike Daly told me was a very good game. I saw Mike Daly at Walmart the other day, and he told me that was a great game. I'll take Mike Daly's word for it.
Right on.
But the Greyhounds are 5-0, and they are at Tug Valley. Number 10 in Single A, East Hardy 5-0, going from not ranked last week to in this week's poll. They play Tucker County. Others receiving votes in Single A, Magnolia, Parkersburg Catholic, and Meadow Bridge coming off that loss at Valley Fayette. Looking ahead at the games this week, a lot of games between ranked teams in the Daily Mail poll. A couple stick out that I want to talk about. Wheeling Park, Morgantown. This is kind of, I get the sense, one of those, how for real are you this year, Wheeling Park, when they play the Mohegans?
Right. It definitely is.
Because there's been so much talk coming out of that part of the state about how this is one of the best Wheeling Park teams in a while, or just this is a really, really good Wheeling Park team. Well, how good are you? Let's see you play Morgantown.
Right. They handled University when University went up to Wheeling a few weeks ago. But, this is a road trip. This is, let's face it, for all the respect I have for John Kelly at University, this is the established program of power. Okay, this is not University. This is Morgantown. It's a different thing. Wheeling Park, however, has always played Morgantown tough, regardless of where they played them. So I expect this to be a good game. Park quarterback Zach Phillips is one of the better pocket passers in the state. He's got a whole arsenal of skilled guys. Bryce Ingram. Stavian Johnson, Eric Banks, they're loaded. Okay, this is like the most talented Park team that maybe has been collected in a good while. They've only made one state championship appearance, and that was in '91 against Capital, a game they lost. But I think that they can go to Pony Lewis Field in Morgantown and give the Mohegans a little bit of a test. You know, I still think this is actually the biggest thing with this game is the question has been about Wheeling Park's line. All right, they've always, it's one of those things. Well, they've always got skilled position players. How's their line? Well, their line so far this season has been getting nothing but thumbs up and gold stars and, you know, free ice cream from Dairy Queen or whatever. But they're going to Morgantown, who has, you know, one of the best lines in the state, if not the best.
Yeah, Morgantown seems like they've got a little bit of everything, but especially at line. Especially at line.
Right. And so that'll be the test for Wheeling Park. I'm going to take Morgantown in this game just because of everything, because it has the experience as a program of these kinds of games, right? I know they just went to Martinsburg 2 weeks ago and lost 28-21. This is the situation where, you know, they get the benefit of being at home. And I just don't see Wheeling Park getting out of there with a win. I just don't.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with you. I mean, stranger things have happened, but that's one I think Wheeling Park, it would be a big upset, definitely, if they won. And that's not to say, like you said, Wheeling Park is a good team this year, but I just don't think they're on that level with Morgantown. I think the Mohegans will show everybody that on Friday.
Yeah.
Shifting gears down a little closer to where we're at in Charleston, Capital's coming off that loss to Huntington. We talked a bit about that game earlier. They play Cabell Midland this week, and I think some of the buzz around Cabell Midland died with that loss to Huntington. But I don't think that loss to Huntington for either team is going to be something that, you know, torpedoes the season. These are two very, very good teams. They're not undefeated anymore, but of those one-loss teams, especially in this part of the state, I'll take either of these teams as 1A or 1B.
Yeah. It's like the MSAC consolation game this week. Because, I figure Huntington's going to end up winning the league title as it's decided by the SSAC rating formula. So I figure either Midland or
Which, I got to say, I think is kind of ridiculous, but that's another rant for another day. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we'll save that one for another day.
Yeah.
But, if this is more like the Midland-Huntington matchup in that the way Midland runs the ball and just powers through people is going to test Capital. You know, their speed better be ready to catch up and cut people off from getting big gains because Midland's opening some holes, period. I don't think it matters who they're playing. They're going to open some holes, and they do have guys that can get through them. Obviously, they score a lot of points. Now, Capital, the biggest thing I think, biggest difference for this matchup for Capital is that I don't think Midland's pass defense is anywhere near as good as Huntington's is. I was not aware of how good Huntington's pass defense was until Friday night. It's top notch. It really is. And I saw Huntington be able to throw the ball and move it on Midland. Midland's pass defense, its secondary, is a question mark. And I think that Capital might be able to exploit it. I really do. Whereas they weren't able to do that against Huntington. And unlike Huntington, Cabell Midland doesn't have two athletic defensive ends that are basically power forwards on the basketball team. They're not 6'5", 240 and can fly. You know, that's what Huntington has at defensive end. So I think that Tyree Pratt will be able to move a little bit more this week. I expect a really good game out of this.
Yeah, I expect a good game, too. I mean, Cabell Midland has been a team that, like I said earlier in the show, they were kind of established as the team from down here, and of course they went on to play in the state championship game against Martinsburg, where they eventually lost. But Campbell Midland coming into this year, you wondered what they would do coming off of the season. Not only were, all these good things happen, you run through undefeated, you run through the playoffs, you play in the state title game, but you get that 1 year kind of loaner deal they had with David Gatos, where he was only there his senior year, and he played such a big part, and it really kind of was the headline marquee guy for that Cabell Midland team last year. Coming into this year, you wondered, okay, well, what do they do now without that guy? And I think they're showing people that the perception that they were a one-man team with David Gatos was an inaccurate one.
Well, I think what it's showing is that Luke Salmons, in his third year, has established his system. The running the wing tee with the talent he has on the line. Look, Midland's always had good linemen. He's been able to maximize the potential of the people in that school, and he's had running backs that he's been able to run that system with. And you said about replacing guys. I mean, well, Gatus basically on 1 year loan. Yeah, now they got Dante Hendricks and Taryn Barnett and Alex Childers back there, and Casey Thomas is leading them all in rushing. They've got four guys that are averaging at least 50 yards a game, carrying the ball. It's the system, okay? And they practice it well, they run it well, and as long as he's there and Cabell Midland doesn't just stop having kids there, they're going to have big lines, and Luke Salmons, as long as he wants to stay at Cabell Midland, is probably going to have them running their wing tee, just barreling down on people. So I think it shows more than anything that he's not finally, it's only been 3 years, right? But he's cemented himself at that school, and that's their identity now.
Well, I mean, I've been high on Luke Salmons as a head coach. Looking back to what he did at his job before he was at Cabell Midland, when he was at, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was Lawrence County, Kentucky?
Yeah.
He's at Lawrence County. He takes a team that went winless.
0-10, I believe.
They went,
yeah.
I forget how many losses, but they didn't win a game, and they played for the state championship in his first year. And he's been a coach of the year, state coach of the year in 2 states now, in Kentucky and in West Virginia. And I know there's a lot of gripes about how he goes about doing his business, and I don't want to get into that here, but his teams win games, and they play a particular brand of football that might kind of rub some people the wrong way, but I get the impression that he doesn't really care, and Cabell Midland is, with him there, is a force to be reckoned with as long as he's there, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And, I'll just touch on it. Luke, I covered Luke when he was in high school at Ravenswood. He's a 99 graduate of there. He won the Hunt Award there in 1998. And he's young. He's part of the new breed of coaches.
Yeah, that was the class that would have been seniors when I was a freshman in high school. So they're not, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. And anytime somebody that young and it has that level of success and has any bit of left of center swagger to them or anything like that, they're going to rub the established guys the wrong way, big time. And I think a lot of it is that. There's some other things too. People don't like that Dante Hendricks came from Huntington over there. They don't like that David Gatus came from Winfield and Taryn Barnett came from Point Pleasant. Yeah, they all moved to Cabell Midland to go to school there. I'm not going to preach about the good or bad of that right now. Okay, that's a 45-minute to an hour podcast in and of itself. I'm not going to get into it.
Yeah, that might be a special feature in the off season one day sometime or something, but not today.
But the bottom line is he wins, and he's not oh gosh, golly,
goodness,
thank you. Yeah, he's not like that, and that'll rub people the wrong way. I like him.
Now, when we do our notes to kind of figure out what we're going to have on the show each week, we just kind of do like a rundown, like an outline of what we're going to have, and we've got Wheeling Park, Morgantown, Midland Capital, and then in parentheses, that looks like it should be a AAA semifinal bracket just about any year. And yeah, you could throw Martinsburg in there, but hey, if they end up going 3-7, like might happen, you might be looking at the Final Four in AAA in those 4 teams.
Yeah, really. It's quite possible.
Yeah. Now, other big game for teams around here that we're going to get into, Hurricane and George Washington. These are teams that I know that a lot of teams, you tend to hear stories about nobody gets along with GW if you're not from GW, or nobody gets along with Hurricane if you're not from Hurricane. Well, now those two schools are playing with each other, so I think it'll be an interesting game, not just from the perception of that and all that stuff, but these are both two pretty good football teams. I think Hurricane having that week off, getting Austin Hensley healed up. Is there any update on that? Do you know?
I haven't had any new update on it. No.
But so
that's me, and I say nope, no news here. No, the thing is, Taylor was going to hold him out all week, and they were going to hope to have him ready for that game. So they intend to play him. I haven't heard any word contradicting that. No.
So let's just assume, for the sake of assumption, that Austin Hensley's going to play Friday.
Right.
Hurricane had that bye week. Comes at a great time, like we talked about, to get him healthy. That game is at George Washington. I gotta think that when it comes time to pick that game, I'm probably going to pick George Washington. I think they're a little too strong for Hurricane. Hurricane, it seems like they get tight sometimes, and they start making mistakes, and things tend to go south. Now, that said, we talked some earlier in the season about Austin Hensley and how, sure, he has big games against teams that aren't as good, but then when the big lights are on, his numbers sort of start to shrink. Well, he's been doing a little bit to sort of disprove that, or maybe try and change that reputation. I'll be interested to see how he plays in this game up on the Hill Friday.
Yeah, I want to add an addendum to that, because I waved that flag for a while about Austin Hensley, and it's not a malicious thing. The fact of the matter is, most people have lesser stats against good teams. Okay, it was just nothing personal, but his numbers were a little bit more. There was a little bit less parity.
Yeah, it wasn't just that they weren't great numbers; they weren't good numbers.
Right, exactly. I mean, GW has feasted off him, particularly in the last couple of years. Ryan Switzer made his life hell as a defensive back, with a couple interception returns for touchdowns. Look, they did. I think you're exactly right. They tend to get tight in bigger games like this, and it's something about GW that makes them even tighter. I think that in a lot of ways, I think Hurricane wants to be GW. I know that people at GW think that Hurricane wants to be GW. They say it all the time. And that is their superiority over Hurricane. And it's a really interesting rivalry that is more, I think, they haven't played really for anything. They met in the playoffs, but it's not like any game between the two has meant something so massive that it warrants, so much hype, so much coverage, so much tension build-up, leading into it.
Is it possible that's because there's so little value placed on the MSAC title as it is? Because it seems like those two have probably crossed paths before with the fate of the conference in the balance, especially in the last 10 years or so.
I don't know. It could be. But like I said, I mean, that's determined by the playoff ratings. So, if they played in a scheduled, like you have to play this amount of games and had standings, win-loss.
But say, if they played in a conference that I'll just say it, that gave a crap about who won and who lost, and made it easy to set it up like that, because it just seems like that's just a cop out. Okay, we'll let somebody else's system decide who our champion is, because we don't care to even keep statistics on who won and who lost when they played each other. I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's pretty fair protest.
I'm sorry, that was my little rant. You can go ahead.
No, it's cool. I just think Hurricane typically comes into these games against GW, at least in recent years, okay, with this being a massive game for Hurricane. And GW comes out like it's this week's game. That's what I've seen. I've seen GW come out generally loose against them and just go about its business, and in each and every instance in the last several years pick up a win pretty convincingly. This is a big game for Hurricane, though. As soon as I say that, it's a very big game for Hurricane because they're 3-2, and they're staring at this game this week, then that back-to-back of St. Albans and Winfield, but then they close the season on the road at Capitol and Spring Valley. You know, they don't know if they're making the playoffs or not. I don't think there's a person in this state that is really confident the Hurricane's going to make the playoffs. Other than coaches and players and parents at Hurricane, I don't think that confidence can really be there because they haven't shown that they can beat a playoff team. Look, Princeton looked like a good win 2 weeks ago. All right? Princeton hasn't won since it beat Bluefield.
Yeah, okay, I think we were absolutely guilty of maybe overhyping Princeton a little much. But they go into Laidley Field and play Capitol, who we go on and on about each week about how good they are. Well, they played Capitol as tough as maybe anybody except Huntington, who beat them. So, I would defend us being high on Princeton and being able to have hindsight and say, okay, maybe they're not as good as we thought they were.
Right. But it's like they've got to get a win at GW or at Capitol and take care of business against Spring Valley and Winfield, and probably get the win at St. Albans or Winfield. Take care of both of those and get a win at Spring Valley. They've got to beat either GW or Capitol, I think, to get in.
Yeah, it seems like they can, like you said, they've got to win one of those games. I'm not going to be able to do the math in my head, but just looking at the schedule and knowing traditionally about how many wins you need against what caliber of teams, Hurricanes almost got to win those two games, and that's an awful tall order for just about anybody in the state, especially a team that doesn't, reside in that rare air with the Morgantowns or Martinsburgs or teams like that. They are certainly not on that level. And George Washington and Capitol are very, very good teams. That's going to be a tough draw for the Redskins to get in, it looks like.
Exactly.
Now, there are all kinds of other good games going on in the state this week. We mentioned some of those matchups when we were running down through the poll. You can find the poll online at wvhuddle.com and in Monday's edition of the Charleston Daily Mail. Just without really getting into them, just go over a couple more as I'm reading them off here. In AA, number 2 Bridgeport plays Kaiser. That was a state semifinal game last year that Kaiser ultimately won. Or some of these other ones. We talked about Oak Hill Point Pleasant earlier. Fairmont Senior Frankfort back in AA. That's going to be a good game. Wadata Bishop Donahue, has potential to be pretty good. So, and Herbert Hoover and Sissonville around here, that'll be a good game. So there's going to be some good games this week. Don't really want to spend a whole lot more time going into the games because I know how we are and we tend to ramble on about these things. And there's 5 or 6 games we could talk about. Just do not have the time to do all that this week. So we'll jump in to your Kennedy Award update. But before we get to that, we haven't really talked about any of the other awards in the state. And you hear them get brought up every now and You hear them get brought up every now and then. Stuff like the Hunt Award and the Huff Award. Derek, if you could maybe go down through some of those other awards in West Virginia for high school players. And let's just kind of start spitballing on who some of those guys that might be candidates are.
Well, just to refresh everybody, the Hunt Award goes to the best lineman in the state. And the Huff Award, which is not nearly as old as people might think it is. It was first given in 1994. Goes to the best defensive player in the state. I think this year, a couple with the Hunt. We'll start with the Hunt. I think Amani Brown at Morgantown is almost sure to be a candidate. He's already, committed to WVU. He's a senior at Morgantown. They've also got Stone Wolfley, who's a tight end and therefore eligible. He's also a defensive end, eligible for the Hunt Award. It's difficult to anticipate whether one or the other or both are nominated for that. Honestly, one or the other, if they're both nominated, it'll just statistically hurt either of them's chance to win it. I think Nigel Cabell at Huntington is
Definitely
one of the best. Yeah, one of the best defensive tackles I've seen in a while. I think he's a good candidate for it as well. James Walton at Capital is a real solid defensive tackle that will probably get nominated from this area. Trying to think of around the state, and maybe these double A and single A people. Typically, I think Chad Small from Ravenswood won the Hunt in 2010, but it's typically gone to triple A players here as of late. A lot of things have, really. I'm not familiar. Martinsburg.
Will Cole, Kyle Allard.
Yeah, really. No, I got another one. Please edit some of this rambling out.
Okay.
Tighten up. But another Hunt Award candidate will be Trevor Stacy from Spring Valley, and that's another Huntington area one. So who knows? We might have two from the Huntington area and two from the Morgantown area kind of eating up loyalties there in the meeting. Unlike the Kennedy Award and unlike, statewide voting, the Hunt and the Huff are settled in the all-state meeting among the voters, the representatives that are in the meeting. Okay, there's only 8 to 10 people who decide these awards. They're nominated, they're represented by, basically a monologue about that player given by that representative, and we all go around the room, then we secret ballot vote on it, okay? So that's why I was talking about people maybe splitting votes between two Morgantown players or so forth. The Huff Award, I've said through most of the summer that I really thought this was Mason Hodges to lose, Mason Hodge from Wayne. But right now, still, Wayne's number one, unbeaten, still just creaming everybody, but they've not really been super awesome. They're not getting that kind of credit and attention from the state yet that I kind of anticipated that they would get.
It seems like for as good as they've been for as long as they've been, you and I talk about them a lot. We mention them on the show just about every week in one way or another, but you don't hear a lot of scuttlebutt about Wayne. It's like they've been so good for so long that people almost forget about them. They just sort of assume Wayne's going to do the Wayne thing and be where they're at. And they don't look at the poll at number one. They start looking at number two because they know Wayne's at number one.
Yeah, they've been there for an awful long time. They've got the longest winning streak in the state. I think it's at 28 games now. They're just doing their thing. And I'm sure that Coach Tommy Harmon and the rest of his staff, as well as, probably most of his players, as well as he's got them conditioned and trained to operate, probably don't mind that they're not getting much attention. They're just able to go about their business. Yeah. So they'll get their attention in November, trust me. Other candidates for the Huff, though, I think A.D. Cunningham at South Charleston, starting locally, is one. I think he plays lights out at linebacker. He's a kid that's really, I think, grown into that position as well. I think you also still have to look at Miguel Cabell at Huntington as one of the best defensive players in the state. We had a situation back when Rodney Hudson at GW in 07 won the Huff Award as a defensive tackle without winning the Hunt Award because Josh Jenkins from Parkersburg won that.
Right.
It's the only time that a lineman has won the Huff Award, but we actually might see that happen this year. It wouldn't shock me at all. Martinsburg's defense is not what it has been in through the majority of this run. So I haven't heard or become aware of any star defensive players out of the Eastern Panhandle this year. I think Stone Wolfley at Morgantown at defensive end will get a nod there. Jeremy Page, the linebacker at Wheeling Park, is doing a good job there. I'm sure that he will be nominated and pushed for this award too. Those are just a couple guys off the top of my head.
Anybody at Madonna, maybe, as good as they play up there in the Northern Panhandle? Might they have a little bit of representation from that area of the state at the All-State meeting?
Oh, yeah. Well, Wheeling will take care of them. Comus obviously is still a Kennedy candidate. I don't know that they've got somebody that is going to threaten as a Huff Award candidate. They've got a couple linemen I know that they rely pretty heavily on, so I wouldn't doubt if they're brought up. Either of them are brought up. Excuse me, it's like 20 after 1 and names are starting to escape my memory. But, Elliot Nero is a real good running back linebacker combo for Madonna. I don't know if he's quite in the Huff Award conversation, but with as much attention as Comus gets, and justifiably so, Elliot Nero is almost every bit as important to that Madonna team.
We'll get into what we do every week where we talk about the Kennedy Award. Safe to say you still got Chazzy Thomas at the top?
Yeah, I do. And I think he's actually starting to pull away. We're going to have one of our writers check out Chazzy this week and do a little bit of a further look into him for next week. Maybe a feature on that because I really think he might be starting to pull away Kennedy-wise even mid-season. And that's something, we've had Switzer like that, do that his junior year too. So it's interesting to watch a kid start to just kind of inch away from the pack. And I think that might be what we're seeing. But at number 2 right now, I still have Jalen Jones, but his hold there is kind of shaky because they're not, like we looked at the schedule earlier, even though he made a little bit of a statewide tour at the beginning of the season, they're not playing very good teams.
No.
And you can't you can't really hang your resume on that. And the other thing with Oak Hill is their fullback, KK Goodman, is getting into the show a little bit more, and that's putting less responsibility on Jalen Jones, and consequently his stats, I didn't check him Friday night, but the week before last, I know he was under 100 yards up at Buchanan Upshur. So they're finding a little more diversity, which is good for them as a team. It's not so great for his Kennedy candidacy. At number 3, last week I had Malik Watkins. He's out of the top 5. Okay, I can't consider him for the Kennedy Award now because
we just know he's not gonna win it. He's not gonna be in the question. So
right,
no use in clogging it up.
Back there, if he finally gets everything squared away.
Sure.
But until then, no. Draven Rife jumps up to number 3 this week. Look, the kid is showing himself to just be a horse, and I can sit around and pace the floor and be a worrywart about it, but until something goes wrong, the kid's showing week after week that he can take 30 plus carries and get GW 250 to 300 plus yards. And he does have them at 5-0, and that has to count for something. And right now, it's got him at number 3, in my opinion, for who's the favorite, because I think he's starting to consolidate a little bit of support in the Kanawha Valley. He's making it harder and harder for voters here to really cast any doubt. You know what I mean? At number 4, I would still have Ross Comus at Madonna, for reasons I spoke about a few minutes ago, just touched on. Number 5, I had it open until we started the show.
Have you talked yourself into the defensive tackle from Huntington in the top 5?
No, I'm not prepared to go that far with Miguel Cabell yet. Right now, I don't think that there are more than 4 viable candidates for the Kennedy Award.
I think that's fair, especially with I don't.
With the way Thomas is starting to pull away.
Yeah, with the way Thomas is starting to pull away, with Jalen Jones still doing what he does, Draven Reif making that move up. Of course, Comas still rolling along with Madonna up in the northern part of the state. And, we'd had guys like Jacob Parker from Meadow Bridge floating around there towards the bottom of that list.
Right.
I thought that in that game that they played Friday night down at WVU Tech in Montgomery, that the Valley beat them in a very low-scoring game, I think that doomed him from even being considered as, by all accounts, he didn't have a bad game. Now, he didn't put up the numbers like he'd been putting up the silly numbers earlier in the year where he runs for 5 touchdowns and 500 yards. But it was just the guy.
He ran like 27 times for about 160 yards and a touchdown. But not to cut you off or anything else, but maybe to finish your thought. I don't. That was Meadowbridge's big red letter game.
Yeah, they lost, and he wasn't super, super impressive. So I mean, that's just it's probably done for him.
And yeah, with all due respect to the Valley Greyhounds, who are undefeated and having a good season, they're not Morgantown, and they're sure not Martinsburg. And if you're talking 160 yards and a touchdown against Single A Valley Fayette, yes, I know the lines are different, and there's smaller players in Single A. That's why they're not considered as much. That's just the truth. I'm sorry, folks.
Yeah,
but
I'm with you, man.
That's what it comes down to. And I think you're right. I think for most voters, that pretty much did it.
All right. Well, I think that just about does it. Another long show this week. We've kind of settled into this, floating right around an hour on this thing, though. I'm not sure what we'll be at when we get it edited down, but it'll be kind of close to that. Just reminder, like we do every week, you can find all of our prep football coverage from not just Derek, mostly Derek, a little bit of myself, and the guys that help us out at the Daily Mail, and even some of the guys at the Gazette at wvhuddle.com. And, we've got Twitter going every Friday. We've got our ticker that updates, photo galleries, videos. You guys can submit photos and videos, and you can tweet at us and do all that stuff. All kinds of cool stuff going on Friday nights. And over the weekend typically is when we get a lot of the new content coming in. So keep an eye on wvhuddle.com for that. You can also find just our Daily Mail stuff at dailymail.com/sports. Derek's on Twitter at It's Really DT. I'm on Twitter at Tom Bragg Sports. The Huddle's on Twitter at WV Huddle. I believe the Daily Mail's is Sports Daily Mail. I can never remember that one. It always does the auto fill in when I start typing it, but I'm pretty sure that's at Sports Daily Mail. That's kind of ridiculous. That seems like the kind of thing I should probably check before I start talking about it, huh? Well, anyway, Derek, you want to close out with any final thoughts before we finish this thing up?
No. No thoughts tonight.
That's Derek saying we record these things late at night and I'm ready to go to bed. And I kind of have the mutual feeling, Derek, so we'll just keep this short and sweet. Guys, thanks for listening. It was episode 7 of the Charleston Daily Mail Prep Football Podcast. I'm Tom Bragg. Thank you, Derek Taylor, for joining us. We'll see you next week.
No problem.